we are going to talk a little bit about the Parsha, which is called Vayigash now, but I wanted to read the lines to you. This is some intense, it's an intense monologue that we hear at the beginning, and we'll talk about why it's so intense, because you may not feel that way, but I do, from Judah, who is, of course, Joseph's brother and speaks on behalf of all of the brothers, if you remember the context, who have kind of gone back and forth from Canaan to Egypt and back again and feel as if they're going to have to now tell their father Jacob that a second child under their care, under their watch, is dead, namely Benjamin. So they are, as the Torah puts it, freaking out. So here's what Judah says in this week's, that is actually, I don't know the etymology of freaking out, but it is somewhere in here, because everything is in here, Steve. So here's what Judah says as a result of really going deep. Many commentaries, not many, but some commentaries say that he is being inauthentic, but I think this is Judah at his most vulnerable and most authentic as he approaches Joseph, who, if you remember, does not recognize him, who recognizes him and his brothers, but they do not recognize Joseph. So I'm going to highlight a little bit, and then we're going to discuss. So Judah now approaches Joseph. This is the very beginning. The word Vayigash has to do with approaching. And says to him, "By your leave, my lord, please give your servant a hearing." That's just a fancy way of saying, Joseph, I pray you will listen to what I am saying before you make this decision regarding Benjamin. And let not your anger flare up at your servants, because you are like Pharaoh. In other words, Judah is saying, we know how powerful you are, and we know that one word, and we're all schmeiced. So please don't become angry. And he says to Joseph, my lord. Second time he uses the word my lord, and we learn in biblical literature class that the repetition of something in a speech like this of my lord is really honorific, if you will. But the number of times that he uses it, that's where the rabbis say he may be overdoing it a little bit, calling him my lord, which is Adoni, not Adonai, but same letters. My lord, he said, you asked us earlier if we have a father or a brother, and we told you that we have an old father, an elderly father, and a young child of his old age, Benjamin, and that he has a brother, Benjamin has, who is dead, namely Joseph, although they're speaking to him, of course. He alone was left with his mother, and so his father loves him all the more. The brothers acknowledge in that moment, by the way, that they understand, as they did at the beginning of this epic story, that Joseph was loved more because he was Rachel's and because he was his child of old age. And then you said to us, bring Benjamin down here so that I can lay my eyes on him. But we told you he cannot leave his father, because if he leaves his father, Jacob, he'll die. Jacob will die. So when we went up to our father, we related to him your words. And when our father said, go back and buy some food for us, he said, we can't go down. We can only go back if we bring your youngest son, Benjamin, with us. And so this is their repetition or their recounting of what they said. And then my father, Judah says, in the singular, my father said to us, you know that the two my wife bore to me, namely Joseph and Benjamin, you know that the two of them, one is dead, one's gone from my side. And I said, surely he's been ripped to shreds, if you remember from the story of the tunic. I haven't seen him to this day. This is about 20 years has passed. But if you take this one, Benjamin, from me too, and some calamity befalls him, you will lower my gray head in woe to Sheol. Sheol is the only real word in Torah that is a description of where you go after you die. There's no heaven in the Torah mentioned. There's no afterlife in the Torah mentioned, just Sheol. And now if your servant, my father, he continues, whose whole being is bound up in his, is not with us, and he sees that Benjamin, the lad, is not here, you, Joseph, you will be sort of a participant in sending our father to Sheol. And then he completes his sentences right before Joseph sort of erupts and cries. So now, Judah says, now, please, let your servant, let me be the one who stays here as your slave in place of Benjamin. I can't bring him down. It'll kill my father. And let Benjamin go home to his brothers. For how can I go home to my father without Benjamin and thus see the harm that my father will suffer? And that triggers, that speech, that monologue triggers Joseph with the following words. Joseph could no longer contain himself. He then, as we know from the story, weeps, cries, and the brothers are reconciled. So I have two questions for us on the Shabbat. One is, what specifically is it that Judah said that triggered Joseph to break down, to lose it, to give in, to reveal himself? What is it? What is the moment, the word, the phrase, maybe even if you can put yourself in that position, what was it maybe that a feeling that was conveyed that made Joseph finally break down? And the second is, and I think this is equally as important a question, is if one of the answers is it was really his rawness, his vulnerability, or his empathy, or whatever emotional vocabulary word you want to use, that triggered it. Why is it so hard for us? Why was it so hard for Joseph for so long to let go of this grudge, obviously, that he held against his brothers? What is it about vulnerability that breaks us out of that shell? Does anyone want to take a crack before I go on for a few more minutes about this, about the commentaries about this? What is it that he said? Here's the easier question. What is it that he said, that Judah said or recounted, that made Joseph crack? Okay, take me and not my brother. Maybe they had a moment. Yeah. Joseph could understand. Please. Judah was one of the people who was involved in Joseph's disappearance, and then the follow-up lie to their father about what happened to him. And now he's down in that pit. And Joseph senses something about that when he says, take me instead. Right? Yeah. Joseph did not what? So maybe what really triggered him was Joseph hears these words, this is going to kill Dad. And as soon as he has that image of his father, Jacob, who he, from all evidence in Torah, loved and adored as much as Jacob loved him and adored him, as soon as he hears that, he thinks, I can't have that on my... I miss my dad. I want to see my dad. I haven't seen my dad in a long time, right? If I do this, it's going to kill him. I can't do that. So that's deep. Both of them are. We had so much fun last week at Hanukkah, I thought we'd go a little bit into some more intense moments in the Torah. Anyone else? I like threes. You can all, yes, please. Was Judah the ringleader of the plot? Let's go back to Vayesha for a second. If we remember, and this is how I would answer your question. There's a lot of ways, of course, in Torah to answer, questions that should be yes/no questions. If you remember what happens in chapter 37, so right at the end of the story of him being thrown in the pit, the Midianites sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officers, and it says around that time, Judah took off and parted from his brothers and fell in with an Adulamite, and then we have the whole story of Judah and Tamar, which sometimes we skip too often. It's a great story. It's the biblical Monica Lewinsky story. Actually, I'm not kidding. Instead of a blue dress, there are other things that Tamar keeps, and it's a whole other thing. So if we go down to where they sat down to eat lunch, if if you remember. And they're sort of looking at the Ishmaelites traveling from Gilead and so on and so forth. Judah is the one who says to his brothers, how are we going to profit? How is it going to profit us if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Then our hands will not be on him, meaning we won't be responsible for him any longer. We don't have to deal with him any longer, but we won't kill him. The implication of Judah's tone and his words in that case were the brothers wanted to kill Joseph. They wanted to leave him in the pit to die. But that Judah was really the salvific force. Now, I'm projecting because Judah becomes Judah, which becomes Jerusalem, which becomes the temple and all that stuff, and we like to think of salvific things. But Judah is the one who saves the day, saves Joseph's life. Question, does Joseph know that? I don't know if he was in earshot of when the brothers were having lunch. Could be. So those are three excellent commentaries on why it was that Joseph ultimately cracked, why it is that he ultimately gave in and falls apart. So those powerful words that fall it, I am Joseph, he says, your brother who you sold into Egypt. Don't be grieved, he says, or don't be angry with yourselves because of what you did. You did a really rotten thing. But don't feel grieved or angry because you sold me into slavery. And now he invokes God. Because he says it was God who sent me here to save lives. He sent me, God, or she, ahead of you. God sent me ahead of you, again he says, to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives. It's a remarkable story. Judah and the brothers, Joseph sort of intuits, immediately think, as soon as Joseph reveals himself, this is intuited, he's going to kill us. He's revealed himself so that he can kill us. But the brothers instead are told, I did not reveal myself to kill you. I revealed myself to teach you something that you seem to not get. And that is that I was sent here ahead of you to save you and our father and our people. It's a profound moment. I just want to, in wrapping this up, because I'd love for you to come to Torah study tomorrow morning. We're going to put these, we are going to put these together and learn about what this moment ultimately teaches us, at least for this year. It'll probably change for next year, but for this year. There's a wonderful author, academic, brilliant commentator, Torah expert named Aviva Zornberg. You've probably read some of her stuff or heard of her. And Dr. Zornberg says the following as a description of what happens, commentary. She says, initiated into the fellowship of pain. And I want to go back to what Kenny said about them having this moment of sort of pure empathy where Joseph is feeling Judah's pain and knows that Judah is feeling the pain that Joseph once felt at the bottom of that pit. Initiated into a fellowship of pain, Judah becomes capable of investing the whole force of his personhood into preventing its recurrence, the recurrence of that pain. Going back to, it's going to kill Dad, or look, I can see what Judah is feeling. Like empathy is really about, as Bill Clinton famously once said, feeling your pain, right? It's about feeling your pain, but showing it through how you're talking, how you're speaking. So she says he wants to make sure that it is prevented from recurring. She continues, with his compassion, Judah's, and his courage, Judah demonstrates before Joseph's very eyes what it means to be a brother. And that's why Joseph snaps. That's why he realizes, as the Torah says, I can't contain myself anymore. The wails, the cries are so loud, he has to excuse people from the room. He doesn't want them seeing him fall apart. So on this Shabbat, I want us to think about these questions about vulnerability and about Judah and what he says, and then bring it back to our own lives and maybe think about this before Torah study tomorrow morning. How is it or when is it that our own anger, our own grudges, our own pain is broken? What is it that other people that we need for them to say or do or share with us that enables our pain to be broken? I would argue one of the main things is to see them in pain for the pain that they caused us. That's a very real human thing. And in fact, what I think makes us begrudge and angry and in pain often is when people are not able to do that. When they can't describe through their own actions and their own words and their own sort of what I would call psycho-spiritualism. When they can't do that, we get so frustrated because all we want to hear is, I'm sorry, and I hurt you, and that hurts me. And it's the people who can never say those words or feel those are the ones who hurt us the most. So we're going to talk about this tomorrow morning. I understand this is heavier, especially than it was last week. But I think it's so important and so valuable and so very, very Jewish, this teaching from this week's Torah portion. So that is your incentive to come study tomorrow morning with me in the Bendelin conference room at 9 a.m. I'm going to finish with the words of Shakespeare from As You Like It. When in doubt with Torah, use Shakespeare. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. And this is our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Shabbat Shalom.